In the Peloponnese Peninsula lies the region of Arcadia, Greece. In Greek mythology, it was a mystical wilderness filled with unspoiled beauty and nature, a garden of paradise. Since its original conception, Arcadia has become synonymous with imaginary areas and utopias in popular culture. When it comes to places named Arcadia, there are a surprising 45, more than half being in the United States. We're here to talk about one of those locations. Just 13 miles away from downtown Los Angeles exists the city of Arcadia, California. With an abundance of greenery, it lives up to the name it was given and has attracted tens of thousands to its borders. However, that wasn't always the case. Everything needs to start from somewhere. How did such a place develop? And how does its history continue to impact the present? Stay tuned as we answer these questions. This is Arcadia, the Garden of Southern California. Before Arcadia was a city, it was just open land. For centuries, that land was first inhabited by the Tongva Native Americans.
They have been here for, of course, centuries. They were a very peaceful tribes. Didn't cultivate much because they lived the land. They didn't have to fend for themselves much. They contributed very little to the land because they lived off of it.
Their way of life would be interrupted by the arrival of Spanish missionaries and the establishment of Mission San Gabriel in 1771. Because of the Spaniards' influence, the Tongva soon became known as the Gabrielinos. As Mexico slowly gained its independence over Spain, calls for the Spanish missions to be disestablished grew. Most of the missions still held loyalty to the Roman Catholic Church in Spain. In order to prevent further Spanish authority in California, much of the California mission lands were taken away and sold off as large grants called ranchos. Part of the Mission San Gabriel would be transformed into Rancho Santa Anita, a land grant containing what is now Monrovia, Pasadena, Sierra Madre, San Marino, and Arcadia. The first owner of Rancho Santa Anita was a man by the name of Hugo Reed, who was granted the land in 1841.
Hugo Reed was the first owner of the Santa Anita Rancho, and he came here from South America, but originally from Scotland. Hugo Reed was a very, very cultured man, and was very influential in establishing our Constitution of California and our boundaries.
He was a sailor and gained his Mexican citizenship. Then he married Victoria Reed or Bartolomea. Once they got married, they were able to claim the land of Santa Anita. He had the first Adobe built in the Arcadia area.
Reed would sell the rancho to his friend Henry Dalton for $2,700. Ownership would then pass from person to person until 1875, when it was bought by Elias Jackson Baldwin. Known best by his nickname, Lucky Baldwin, he is also regarded as the man who started the city of Arcadia.
Baldwin was the last owner of the rancho, and he bought it in 1875 for $200,000 from Newmark. And then he immediately became interested in developing it to its fullest.
In 1903, under Baldwin's leadership, Arcadia was incorporated as a city. Its population grew along with the number of establishments built. Among these structures were Baldwin's Oakwood Resort Hotel and Anokia, a mansion built for Lucky Baldwin's daughter, Anita Baldwin. As Arcadia continued to develop, it wasn't long before war struck. 1914 marked the start of World War I. Arcadia became home to the U.S. Army's Ross Field Balloon School. At this training facility, officers would learn techniques to observe hot air balloons in case of enemy activity.
It's named after a man who was the only American soldier killed overseas in a ballooning accident. He actually wasn't trained in Arcadia, but they decided to name this particular field after him in his honor. None of the soldiers that were trained here actually saw any battle overseas because the war ended before their training was complete.
Shortly afterwards, the 1920s would come and bring forth the Roaring Twenties. For Arcadia, this led to its population and reputation skyrocketing.
We were still a very small suburb of Los Angeles. There wasn't a huge population at the time. It was mostly farming and ranching. It was a huge poultry industry here for many years.
People came and purchased large plots of land to raise chickens. It was the chicken capital of Southern California.
Something else that might have contributed to Arcadia's rising popularity was the arrival of royalty, Prince Eric of Denmark.
Prince Eric was a prince of Denmark. He gave up the throne to marry a Canadian woman who was the granddaughter of the lumber baron of Canada. They met and married and moved to Arcadia and decided that he was going to raise chickens.
Prosperity would have to end eventually, however, as the success of the Roaring Twenties would soon be silenced by the calamity of the Great Depression.
Many of the people had to live on the land. They raised their vegetables and their chickens and sold their goods to people in the community and in the surrounding areas. It was a time of hardship for Arcadia, though.
But despite the hardships during the Depression, it did revive what would later become one of Arcadia's oldest traditions, horse racing.
Horse racing's been in Arcadia as long as Lucky Baldwin's been around. There were a few periods of time where it was stopped for various reasons. One was that the racetrack burned down, another was that racing as gambling was outlawed.
Even though it was during the Depression and people didn't have money, it was something to do and kept their minds off of the Depression and how bad everything was going.
The horrors of war would be seen again with the outbreak of World War II as American troops trudged overseas waging battles against the Axis powers. Japanese Americans were trudging into internment camps across the nation.
It was unfortunate, but the Japanese were interned for a very short time in the racetrack property.
Santa Anita Racetrack was the largest and longest running assembly center. Basically, that was just where they processed all the Japanese Americans before sending them off to the various camps across the country.
With the coming of the 1950s, the world's population would grow rapidly as millions of babies were born annually. This growth would also be seen in Arcadia. The increased number of children led to the need for more city services. Arcadia was developing into a suburban area.
I remember many of the people that moved here in the late 50s complained of the roosters waking them in the morning, for example.
My house, when we moved into it, one of the sheds was originally a chicken coop, because Arcadia was very big on poultry at one time.
Today, Arcadia has over 50,000 residents and continues to grow in its population. Over the years, the city has changed dramatically.
When I moved here, I knew everybody on the block. I could walk down the street and I knew the names of their children, what they did, their problems, and their happinesses, their successes. Today I walk down the street and I know 5 people on the block.
Populations become bigger, the homes have become bigger, things have changed. Now it's a more diverse community today. It used to be not uncommon to see kids out playing in the streets, which is something you don't see much today.
So the closeness is no longer there. I wouldn't think of going next door to borrow a scissors or a lawnmower or a cup of sugar or something like that.
A prime example showing Arcadia's transformation over the years is its own high school, Arcadia High. Ever since its start as a city, Arcadians have been heavily interested in education.
I believe Arcadia High School offers an outstanding educational opportunities for students, academically and extracurricularly.
The same things that brought my parents to Arcadia is what brings people to Arcadia today. We've always had a very, very strong education. Education's always, at least in my lifetime, education's always been important to the city.
Competitive, but not as competitive as I see it today, but it was something that enabled me to become successful in the future and do well in college, so I'm very thankful for the education.
A bond measure was made in 1951 to propose the creation of a high school in Arcadia. Construction would be finished in 1954. Since then, the school would only grow in size and attendance.
We have a lecture hall now. We didn't have that before. Back then it was an old photo lab.
We had junior high instead of middle school, so no freshmen here. We didn't have the J building.
Didn't have a nice football field and a nice big stadium that we have now. We had what was it called, a temporary stadium that they had built back in the 50s.
You know, we used to have lockers here on campus, so where all of the boarded paintings that we have in the hallways, they actually housed all of our lockers.
Before, in front of like the old orchestra building, which is now the percussion room, there used to be a huge field of grass. We don't have that anymore. I had a really hard teacher who was super mean, and when we were late, he made us do push-ups until he told us to say stop. But at least I was in shape back then. I wouldn't be able to do it now.
One of the things that was interesting was the way our pep rallies were. we had a big spirit thing that would happen. Mr. Payne would, who was one of the assistant principals, would lead that, and he'd have our spirit can, and people would get louder, and then people would come out and do spirit-based performances, and me and a guy named Jason Wu and a few other people, we got this strange idea that we'd go out there and sing the Book of Love by the Beatles, and yeah, that was embarrassing.
The city of Arcadia has been influenced by the interactions of many. Over the course of its history, prominent figures and eras have faded away, leaving behind only memories. And as time continues to flow forward, more and more will be eroded away, forgotten forever.
It's a shame that Arcadia in the 70s and 80s, where the city was so involved in expanding, that many of the really nice, beautiful old homes were destroyed. The mansions of the 20s are gone. There are so few left. It just breaks my heart to see some of the remaining homes destroyed.
Our present and future are the way they are because of the past. As such, Arcadia has strived to ensure its history lives on. From the Arcadia Gilb Museum to the Arboretum, efforts to preserve Arcadia's history have been made.
We use this building for weddings, baptisms, birthday parties, and that's what keeps us alive.
Sarah Baldwin's home is still in existence on Foothill. We have Prince Eric's home on Santa Anita.
As you walk around the city or drive around the city, you'll see historical markers that will say history lives here. Some of the key buildings for Arcadia's history as it can be found in the Arboretum.
We have a large collection of artifacts as well as our historic buildings, and it runs the gamut of everything from the stagecoach, Mr. Baldwin's tally-ho, to costume and textile, archaeological objects, furniture, and that sort of thing.
Through the conservative actions taken in protecting the memory of the past, it is hoped future generations can learn off of what happened prior.
I believe that we should preserve as much of the city as possible because history is wonderful and we're losing some of it a little bit at a time.
As any historian will tell you, history is very important. Without knowing where we've been, we won't be able to correct mistakes that we have already committed and make sure that we don't repeat them in the future. But it's also just an important way for us to connect with ourselves and with each other. It's a way for people to build community when they have that connected and shared history. And it's really important to make sure that we continue to share our own history with visitors. It's a way for us to kind of show off our own city and to show what we're proud of, and even to show things that maybe we're not so proud of but need to be acknowledged and help and use it as a way to help us move forward.
But even as the curtains close on his documentary, more and more history will be made, and hopefully those who come after us will gain a better appreciation for what came before them.